Alright, so these switches I messed up pretty bad last time by trying a wax-based lubricant for the springs. The wax was way too thick. It was waxy. It was wax, okay? So it built up on the springs, gummed them up really bad, made the switches extremely sluggish. And then the other thing that I tried last time with these switches was powdering the switch bottoms with PTFE powder. And between the wax and the PTFE powder, the switches turned out really sluggish and bad. But what I really wanted to test was the Christo Lube MCG-195. So I really couldn't tell if it was doing a good job or not with all the other confounding factors. So I went ahead and cleaned these switches, got rid of all the wax, got rid of all the PTFE powder out of the switches, and now I am just putting them back together again with the usual silicone-based grease that I always put on my springs. So I haven't had trouble with that in the past. Hopefully it'll be okay now. And I'm gonna go ahead and skip the PTFE powder. It was kind of a crazy thing to try on these switches anyway. And I put way too much on because I was kind of tipsy. And I'm just gonna mainly lube the stems with Christo Lube MCG-195. And hopefully we'll be able to see, now that I'm only varying one variable, deviating from what I usually do when I lube switches by one variable instead of three. Hopefully now we'll be able to isolate that variable of the Christo Lube MCG-195 and see how that performs. So here I have my nice clean stems. They've been cleaned of any wax residue. So I'm going to need to go ahead and lube them again. So, and my switch tops are right here. I can just remember what I did with the little jar of lube. Here it is. Here it is, Christo Lube MCG-195. This is an engineering sample they were kind enough to give me because I explained to them how some of us were researching different lubes that they sell. That this, Quaker, ECL, whatever, engineered custom lubes. We were researching some of their products for use in mechanical keyboards, and they were kind enough to send me a sample. So I'm going to go ahead and lube these stems. Now this is a high viscosity grease, but the thickness is not very high. So that helps make it a little bit easier to apply. Kind of like you have the 205G0. The fact that it's grade 0 helps make it easier to work with. Well, that's the case here. This one I think was a grade 1.5, if I remember correctly. It's not grade 0, but it is somewhat thin for considering how viscous the base oil is. So if you didn't know, greases have an MLGI thickness rating that tells you how thick the final product is, but then the base oil has a viscosity rating of its own aside from the thickener. So just a little background, a grease is typically an oil with something to thicken it. So in the case of these Krytox style lubes, these fluorine greases that we use, typically what we're talking about is perfluoropolyether, I think it's called, oil, PFP oil, with PTFE powder in it as a thickener, and then some binders to help try to keep it from separating, and maybe other proprietary additives, little special ingredients that the manufacturer might have found work better. But mainly it's PFP oil with a PTFE powder to thicken it. And so you can start with different viscosities of PFPE oil, and then you can regardless of whether you start with a thicker or thinner viscosity base oil, you can thicken them all to the same thickness by adding more or less PTFE powder. So the NLGI grade tells you the final thickness of the grease. It doesn't tell you the viscosity of the base oil. And the interesting thing about that is when the grease is lubricating something like a switch where there's friction, dynamic friction under load, the PTFE powder acts almost like a sponge. Like it holds the oil in place until it's under pressure, and then it kind of releases the oil. So the dominant factor when you're actually moving the switch parts in how smooth they feel is going to actually, and how draggy also that they feel, is actually going to mainly be the viscosity of the base oil, not necessarily the total thickness rating of the grease. So that's important to know, because if you want a less draggy grease, you might want to use a lower viscosity base oil. That means going down in numbers. If you're dealing with Krytox, for example, 204 is going to be lower viscosity base oil than a 205, and a 206 is going to be even thicker. A 207 is going to be an even higher viscosity base oil. But all of those different greases, whether it's 204, 205, 206, 207, can all be offered in the same NLGI grade. They can all come, for example, in grade 2 or grade 0, and that grading just means how thick they are after the PTFE powder has been added. So don't pay too much attention to the NLGI grade number, because that's mainly to do with how easy it is going to be to work with, and how well it's going to stay in place and not ooze out, and not to, not ooze its way out of the part and things like that. But the actual ability of the lube to cover up surface irregularities and make it feel smooth instead of feel like a washboard, that's going to increase with the higher viscosity base oil. So that's why, for example, you hear people say 205 G0 is so smooth, it's better than 3204. Well, yeah, the base oil is a higher viscosity, it's going to be smoother. But they're both grade 0, so they're about equally easy to work with. So it's all very interesting. There's a lot you can read about when it comes to tribology. So I'm going to shake these now. I'm going to turn down the gain so it's not too loud. Get these stems ready. stems have been adequately shaken. Since I'm using a higher viscosity grease, I wanted to have a really light coat. Now when you're using a high viscosity grease, like 205 or higher, I would recommend using a very light coat. Now if you can see here, the container hardly has any kind of, just barely has a visible kind of sheen of grease on it after I shaked these for several minutes. A good rule of thumb, if when you shake them your stems are sticking to the side, you probably used too much grease. So I would recommend for these to start with less grease, because it's easier to add more. If you look at them and they look like they don't have enough, it's a heck of a lot easier to add more later and shake it again than it is to try to remove some. So when in doubt, if you're using these thicker greases, like anything from even like 3204 and 205, but most of all 205 or higher, definitely I would recommend don't put very much on. Use pretty much, I would go as far as to say that you want as thin a coat as you can possibly apply, whether it's through the paintbrush method or whether you're shaking them like me. Either way, you're probably going to be best served by the thinnest coat that you can possibly apply with these thick, higher viscosity lubes. I mean, not thick as in the grease is thicker, but the viscosity of the base oil. So if you're talking about a 205, 206, Christo Lube 112 is another thick one, or Christo Lube 195 is one that nobody's using yet but me, but I'm trying it out here. That's the one I'm trying now. This is a Christo Lube 195, and that's a high viscosity lube, so definitely want to go light. I'm going to go thin coating with this really viscous, high viscosity stuff. So I'm going to go down on my knees here. Sometimes my back gets sore, and sometimes it's a little easier for me to do this kind of work down on my desk if I kneel down. So I'm going to spend a little time in a kneeling position to change it up while I put these stems on the springs. So my main goal here tonight, and you might notice by the way that I've already applied the switch films and I already lubed my springs. So my main goal here tonight is I want to determine whether this Christo Lube MCG-195 is a viable option for using in switches, or if it's just too viscous that's just going to gum up the switches. Now, something to think about here is that the springs I'm using are Sprit 63.5 slow curved springs. So they're not a real heavy spring. They're not super light either. I think they're a good kind of middle of the road spring, kind of a popular weight in the hobby right now. So I thought they would be a good candidate for this experiment. The switch stems I'm using are Outemu Sky V2.1 stems. So these stems are essentially kind of cherry clear stems, almost, you could say. They're very similar to cherry clear, they're hard to even tell apart from cherry clear stems. So they're also very similar to Zelio stems. So they have a pretty good sized tactile bump. And the switch housing I'm using for this test is a combination that I have never tried before, but I have high hopes for. It is a Gateron Milky bottom housing with the Gateron clear switch top Now the reason for that is, in my experience, I feel like the clear Gateron switch tops are easily the smoothest tops, and sometimes you get friction between the switch stem and the switch top, and sometimes on cheap keycaps you can even get friction between the keycap stem and the switch top. So I think it's really important for the flexibility of your keyboard. If you want your keyboard to be smooth in all conditions, I think it's really important to have a really smooth switch top. So that's why I've chosen my favorite switch top of all, which is the Gateron Clear. Now, I've applied switch films from TX keyboards because that will make sure that the switch tops fit tightly enough that there's no play and no rattle, and that the sound from one switch to the next will be more consistent. Now, if you look at my other videos that I've done in the past, you can find videos where I show a before and after, where I show you how some switches sound without films, and then I show you how they sound with switch films. So that can help you see what it is that they do, what effect they have on the sound of the switch. But at this point, I've done this enough times that I pretty much have a routine down pat, so that applying switch films only adds a few extra minutes to my overall routine. So I feel like it's worth it, even if the improvement is small. Without knowing how big of an improvement I'm going to get on these switches, because I've never built these switches before, I would still go ahead and apply the films, because it's like, in the best case, I might get a really good improvement. In the worst case, I might not notice any improvement. But they aren't going to harm anything. They aren't going to make the switch sound worse. There's just no way. So I feel like they're worth spending a few more minutes. So if you want to, tweak your switches down to the last little detail and make them sound the very best you can, I would highly suggest adding to your switch modding routine. If you're already lubing your springs, and you're already lubing your switches, and you're already doing everything else, putting, spring swapping, making sure you're using a high quality spring that doesn't crunch, it doesn't scrape, then one more thing you can do to step up your game just a little bit more is you can go to TX keyboards and buy you some Korean switch films from Kin over there, who I'm not sure if he invented the concept of switch films, but he certainly popularized them here in the West. And I've been buying switch films from Kin for a while now. The nice thing about his switch films is the material that he makes them out of. It's like a plastic sheet that he cuts them out of. It's a thick enough material that's rigid enough that it's easy for me to grab the films with my hands and stick them onto the switch housings. Whereas some of the competitors I've seen that sell switch films, their films are thinner, a thinner, more flimsy material that can fold or bend in half when you're trying to work with it. It's not as easy to handle. And also, the thicker film actually makes the switch top fit even tighter than the thin film. So I feel like Kin over at TX Keyboards has got the thickness just right. Now, if you made the switch film any thicker, you might not even be able to get the switch to close. It's already a little bit difficult sometimes to get these switches closed all the way with films on them, but I think it's worth it. Almost got all our little soldiers standing to attention here. Just a few more left. I think it's a good sign that in my container my stems are not sticking to the side very much. So that's good. That means I probably didn't overlube them. This is just something I've noticed from experience that it's not very scientific, but I have noticed from experience that when I see them getting gooped onto the side, sticking to the side because of the amount of grease on them, I can kind of tell myself, well, you really put a lot of grease on these stems. Might have overdone it. You might have over-lubed them. And you know, with some greases and oils, some greases, it's actually not as big of a deal if you over-lube them. Doesn't mess up the feel as much. But for example, if you use a 3203, Trebosis 3203 from switchmod.net, and you over-lube your switches, they're still gonna feel okay. They're not gonna feel great, but they'll be alright. But if you take a 205G0 grease and you over-lube your switches with that, they're gonna feel awful. So let's get back up in the saddle here and put the tops on. Well, I don't want to speak too soon, but that seems to feel a lot better than the last attempt that I made. Last attempt I made at building these switches was kind of a disaster, as I explained earlier. I tried too many new tricks all at once, and some of them just really didn't work out. So, fingers crossed that this time we'll get a winning set of switches that'll feel good and sound good. I like the looks of these switches. Kind of fun. They've got the white, the clear, and then the little ridge of black around the edge. Kind of like eyeliner. It's kind of cool. Kind of makes them look more intense. They look kind of distinctive. I don't recall seeing other switches look like this. See, that's another reason for you to want to get just some switch films. You can make your switches look really aesthetic. I think it makes them look cool. And as we all know, looks are the most important thing, aren't they? Just kidding. Oops. Turned that one a little bit, didn't I? As you may know, if you've done switch films before, as you may know, it is definitely more challenging putting the switches together with films versus without. But I don't think it's a lot harder. I think it's just a minor annoyance, minor nuisance. You have to take a few minutes longer to make sure that they're all snapped completely shut. I still think it's worth it. What do I call these switches? So they're milky bottoms, clear tops, sky stems. Maybe cloudy, clear above, cloudy and clear skies. I don't know. Milk and water skies. You gotta have a clever name for your Frankenswitch after all. If these turn out to be really nice, I wanna have a name ready to call them when people ask what they are. I've never built this particular combination before, so it's always fun. It's always fun to assemble some new Franken switch. I think that's one of the funnest parts of the hobby for me, is experimentation, modification, taking something from the manufacturer and making it your own. Putting your own spin on it, putting your own twist on it, molding it to your preference. That's what's fun to me. And hopefully to you too if you're watching this. I don't know if anyone's actually watching this live. I'll probably post it online though. If the switches turn out to be any good, I'll put it on my YouTube channel, because people may be interested to see how this new type of switch turned out. But if it just totally sucks, then I may not bother uploading it to YouTube. I had a bunch of viewers watching me when I made the previous batch, the failed experiment, where I tried a bunch of weird things that I never tried before, and it didn't turn out well, and it was pretty crappy. So it's funny that I had a lot of people watching me when I did that. Now I'm doing something that might actually be good, and nobody's here. I think it's just a really awkward time. But fingers crossed that it'll work out good, and I'll put it on YouTube for someone to enjoy. So I need some good switches. I'm making these. I hope that they turn out good, but I need some interesting switches to use for a keyboard I'm going to build for a review. I'm going to be reviewing a Boardwalk keyboard. Now the Boardwalk is a very interesting keyboard. It fits into the standard 60% keyboard case, but it's an ortho keyboard. It has a lot more keys than a 40, but a more standard layout than something like a Prionic. So it seems to me like something actually like a really useful design, more useful than most orthos I see out there. I mean, another thing that I like about this, I really am excited about this, building this Boardwalk, is that the Boardwalk allows you to do a hybrid layout that's kind of like a 65% layout that fits in a 60% case. So it's fits in a 60% case, and the layout is mostly ortho. But then over in the lower right corner, you have an arrow cluster, and you also have a full-size 6.25U spacebar. So I think that's really cool. That means you can use if you have some Ergodox keycaps, you can combine those with some more standard keycaps for things like spacebar, and you can end up with a really, really cool, functional, mostly ortho layout that is a little bit easier for you to get used to if you aren't a hardcore ortho person, or you haven't had that much experience with ortho. So I'm really excited about that. I'm gonna build that board, and I'm gonna do something kind of interesting and fun with that board. I'm gonna test a product from a vendor called mkultra.click. He's got a really kind of a conspiracy theory looking website, but he sells foam that has been cut to fit between your plate and your PCB. So probably on the Boardwalk, I'm guessing the Boardwalk will be the first keyboard that I try this on, but I'm gonna try building the keyboard without the foam first, I guess, and take a recording, and then on the same recording I'm gonna desolder the switches and remove the switches and the plate and build it again with the plate foam, and then see how it sounds with the keyboard in the same position, the microphone in the same position, everything the same gain settings, so that we can get a really good before and after sound comparison of what actual effect this plate foam has or doesn't have on the sound of the keyboard. So that I think will be really cool. You'll want to tune in for that. Some good keyboard science there, because that's the kind of thing that a product like that, if it works the way it says it does, it could be a game changer. But on the other hand, it might not actually do what it says it does. I don't know. We got to test it. Got to try it and listen. Check the results. So that's what I'm gonna do. But I need some good switches for that. So hopefully these will work out and fit the bill. Now, as usual, I'm testing them in my hot swap Fanoe, which is a fake canoe. I'm not proud of that, but the thing that is very helpful about this keyboard is that it's hot swap, and it's bottom mount with a brass plate. It's got good case filler in it. The acoustics are pretty good. You know, it's a keyboard that a lot of people have told me sounds good. So it's a good hot swap platform for me to compare different switches in and how they sound. Because I wouldn't necessarily want to compare using a keyboard that's like really cheap, because most people in this hobby, in the custom keyboard hobby, are interested in fancier keyboards. And it wouldn't be great for me to use a keyboard that sounded really weird or different, really unusual or bad. This keyboard sounds pretty normal for what you would consider a good sounding keyboard. It's pretty typical of a good sounding keyboard for its size. And last but not least, you wouldn't want to have to desolder all your switches every time you wanted to test a different switch. So the fact that it's hot swap is nice, because it used to be that there weren't very many hot swap fancy custom keyboards out there. Now that is certainly changing in recent times. We're seeing, and I wonder if this is going to encourage there to be more influencers and content creators in this hobby, because with the advent of more high-end custom keyboards that are hot swap, like the Rama U80 that's going to be coming out, it's going to be easier than ever for someone to have a very expensive, fancy, well-designed, high-quality, well-respected keyboard that's hot swap, and they can just quickly throw in some other switches to do a video online. So that didn't always used to be the case. You know, it used to be that for the most part, almost as a rule, the nicer keyboards were not hot swap. If you had a hot swap keyboard, it was probably some janky, either low entry level or mid-range keyboard. It wasn't going to be a high-end custom. But now, I think we could say that Rama has been leading the way in that aspect, but also other guys like the Van keyboards have really been bringing hot swap to the table, to the big boy table, with the well-made CNC machined custom keyboards that also are hot swap. But when I bought this Fanoe, we were kind of on the cusp of that, and those are also the ones that did exist, like the M60A, for example, very nice hot swap keyboard, custom. The ones that did exist were pretty expensive, and I was still fairly new to the hobby, so for me, finding this keyboard as cheap as it was on Taobao, and having hot swap capability, and being acoustically about the same as other high-end customs, was a godsend for me, because it allowed me to really get some momentum on my channel, typing tests and switch comparisons and reviews and such. So even though I'm not happy that it's a copy, and I feel bad about that I supported someone who who rips off other people's designs. But at the same time, it has been a very useful and beneficial keyboard for me. And so life's full of little gray areas where you have to wonder, was that the right thing to do? But it's kind of a funny story, in fact. When I bought this keyboard, the auction, or not auction, the group buy on Taobao, the listing showed a picture of a keyboard like this, but where it says Canoe here on mine, the picture in the item listing showed the logo of a dove. And so I don't speak Chinese, and maybe I misunderstood something, but when I ordered the keyboard, I thought that I was ordering a keyboard that was going to have that dove. And being kind of new to the hobby, I didn't know that much about Canoe keyboards and who sells them, and whether it was whether that was somebody's trademark design or something, or whether it was just a type of keyboard. So I thought I was getting a keyboard that was going to have a dove on it, and it was going to look like a canoe, and it was going to be pretty much, people were telling me, oh yeah, it's going to be as good as a canoe, but for a lot less money. And I thought, oh yeah, well, and the downside is I'll have that stupid dove on there instead of saying canoe, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. I'm willing to live with that. So that's what I thought I was going to get. Then months and months go by. I think it was like 6 months. I finally received the dang thing, and it says, lo and behold, as you can see, it says Canoe. And I never asked them to write Canoe on there, and I didn't understand that was the default engraving. I thought that the dove was the default engraving. I thought that's why they had that as the picture on the listing. So I got a lot of static from different people about that, and about how I was supporting people who steal designs, and how I was I forget what else, and how I should send it back and all this and that. But I kept it, and I've been really enjoying it. And so I just told myself, well, from now on, I'll try to support the real designers in our community. And so I've done that. I started joining group buys by people in the community, like the Space 65, Kepler, Keycap group buys. So once I started getting into group buys, I felt like I was okay. Well, now I'm really doing this hobby the way it's done, the way it's supposed to be done, and it's kind of like the real deal now. Oh, and Satisfaction 75 is another one that I'm excited for. So, kind of have my janky background of this Fanoe, but it's really helped me a lot. So, let's see, I'm almost done. Boy, when you put the switch films on these Gateron clear tops, it makes the legs poke out to the sides more. And if you have a tight-fitting plate like this Fanoe does, it can be pretty hard to get the switches in. But so far, I think I'm doing it. I think I'm doing a good job, hopefully. We'll see when I pull up this keyboard tester how many pins I've bent trying to insert these switches. I don't know why that always happens. You try to get them perfectly straight and you still end up bending a few. But fingers crossed. Here's my Alt GR, spacebar. These have milky bottoms because recently I have kind of become interested in milky bottoms because of the mellow sound that they seem to produce. They sound pretty nice to me. However, I built a layered acrylic keyboard with these, with some milky switches similar to these, except they had halo stems and they had milky tops. But I liked them in that acrylic keyboard. I'm really interested to see whether I'm still going to like them in a metal keyboard, which, you know, in theory might sound a lot harsher than an acrylic keyboard. So I don't know what's going to happen. So let's see, keyboard tester. Yes, let's see which keys work. I'll put it on the screen so you can see what I'm doing. Yeah, that's enough. You don't need to see the whole thing. Okay. Already we got one bad. That's kind of a bummer. So fast right out of the gate. One of them not working already. Alright. Let's straighten that bent pin. It's always the same thing. It's always this smaller pin, this thinner pin that's made out of thinner metal, bending over, being curled over. That's always what it ends up being. Same problem. Oh, mercy. Wow. That'll work. Ah, what do you know? That is awesome. I had like one that was bad. Okay. Now, let's do a typing test. See if I can type something. Twitch. Let's see if I can get people into this room for a minute. Alright. With any luck, maybe somebody will join the chat. with us. With me, I should say. Grab some alcohol. Alright, just getting the grease off my hands. Hey, what's up? I just finished building a batch of switches, or rebuilding. I built them last night and messed them up really bad. They are ink bottoms with, sorry, not ink bottoms, I'm tired. Okay, they are Gateron Milky bottoms with 63.5 gram Sprit slow curved springs and clear Gateron tops and switch films, and the stems are Outemu Sky 2.1, so pretty much a clone of cherry clear stems, also similar to Zelio's stems. So I originally built these switches last night, and I was trying 2 experiments because I was like drunk, and so I was trying 3 different new things at once. The first one was I powdered the bottom housings with PTFE powder, like with the makeup brush. The second thing is that I used paraffin wax chain lube on my springs, and that stuff got so sticky and thick and gunked up on the springs. And then the third most interesting thing that I tried was I tried one of the new Christo Lubes that I have that I don't think anyone else has been trying yet for keyboards, for keyboard switches. It's the MCG-195. Wrong side. Christo Lube MCG-195. So I lubed the stems with this Christo Lube 195, and so I did those 3 modifications all together, and the switches were pretty much unusable. They were just crap, just super sluggish. The spacebar wouldn't return. I had to put heavier springs in the spacebar, and then the enter key, and then the shift, and the backspace. And I was trying all these things to try to save it, but finally I was like, it's dead. This is dead DOA. So what I did instead is I couldn't sleep, so I tore them apart. Oh, I also filmed them. I don't know if I mentioned I applied switch films from TX keyboards. So anyway, I took these ruined switches and took them all completely apart, saved all the parts, and I used a brake cleaner to remove all the paraffin chain wax from the springs, and I got the springs back to bare metal clean. And then I similarly used brake cleaner and alcohol to scrub and clean the housings because they had gotten paraffin gooped onto them from the transferred from the springs. And then I had to do the same thing with the stems. I had to chemically, scrub and clean the stems to get rid of all the paraffin. So I finally got rid of all the traces of this paraffin gunk and all the traces of the PTFE powder inside the housings. Finally got back to some bare switches again. I said, let's try this again, only this time I just want to focus on, I want a milky bottom with a cherry clear type stem, or in this case it's sky, a clear Gateron top, switch films, and this new lube, MCG-195. So that's what I built the second time around. So this is my repentance here. This is my penance that I'm just finishing here to completely do over a very tedious, time-consuming Switch modding session to clean everything and do it all over again. And hopefully this time the results will be acceptable. You should have seen the results the first time around. It's got to be the worst Switches I've ever built. Another thing I did better this time is I applied, even though I used the tub lube method on the stems, I applied a really very thin coat of the grease on the stems, which I think will be really nice. So, tactility wise, let's see. Let's feel. They feel mildly tactile. So this this MCG-195 is a high viscosity grease. So even the very light coating is just, it's making these tactile stems feel only very mildly tactile. I mean, to the point where they almost feel linear. So, but I think some of that will work in over time, and they'll start to feel more tactile again. That usually happens with most switches that I've lubed. So next, I'm gonna see how they sound. Do a typing test. See if they sound any better. Hopefully. Okay. I mean, at least my spacebar works now. Jeez, they were so sluggish that spacebar wouldn't even work. Okay. Maybe I should move this closer so you can really hear. I think they sound pretty good. Kind of quiet and subdued. These would be really good for in the office or in a keyboard that's amplifies sound that's really echoey, like maybe in a wooden keyboard or any keyboard that's not well dampened. But they have a kind of a creamy sound. Let me do some more. Yeah, I think they sound pretty nice. I think they sound pleasant. So, this is much better. My mods work. My mods work, yeah, it sounds better. So I think these are a success. But I better get a couple hours of sleep now, if I can. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions, you can hit me up on Discord as usual, and I'm sure I'll talk to you later. Thanks for watching.